Welcome back to Be My Guest. Joining me on the line right now is Dick Pound, who is the former Vice President of the International Olympic Committee, former President of the World Anti-Doping Association. He's been an advocate in terms of athletics being, the need for athletics to test further and further for doping and doping violations, and a far bigger need to look into it more than it has been. Dick, I'm just wondering what you think now about, we've talked about it before, specifically concerning Lance Armstrong and what he'd have to do to basically repair all the damage that he's done. He's done this interview with Oprah Winfrey. There's a lot of talk about it. It's going to run Thursday and Friday. Are you convinced this is the first start for him towards just basically getting his life back on track again?
Well, I hope it is. The problem is we don't know what he has said, and I must say that he's always been very defensive about what he's done and not done and so forth. So much will depend on how forthcoming he is with Oprah.
Now, Oprah has already said, she's been very protective of these tapes to make sure that nothing is leaked to the internet. But she did say on CBS this morning, "I would say he did not come clean in the manner I had expected. It was surprising to me." It's also surprising to me that if she spent 2.5 hours with him and didn't really get what she wanted, then I would say maybe it's her fault for not being more probing, because I'm sure, I'm only guessing that he decided to do it with Oprah Winfrey because maybe he thought if he went in another forum with another talk show host, he would have been drilled more than perhaps she did. But if she said she didn't feel that he came clean, then again, you're already starting to wonder, what exactly did he say beyond just saying, "I did it"? What would you expect him to say? What would you want to hear him say?
You mean if I were giving him advice on how to start the road back to redemption?
No, I'm just saying, what would you, in this 2.5-hour interview, what are the things you would expect to hear? And then if you didn't hear it, you'd say, well, I think he's basically just only scratching the surface. What do you want to hear in this interview?
Well, what I'd like to hear is that, yes, I did all this stuff, and I let my consuming ambition to win color my judgment, and I cheated. I acknowledge that.
Would you like to hear him go into detail about the whole process, how it happened?
Absolutely. I mean, that's right now. If he only says I cheated, we already know that. And you've been suspended for life from all Olympic-related sport activity. If you want to reduce that life sentence, you're going to have to do something that will help significantly assist the fight against doping in sport, which means you've got to say how it happened, how the money moved, how they seem to be able to avoid tests at the right time, whether anybody that hasn't already been identified in the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency report was involved, and if so, how, and basically all of those kind of details that will help somebody improve the fight against doping in sport, knowing the techniques that have been used. So if he wants to get that sentence reduced, he's got to bring something to the table. And simply saying, "Oh, all right, you got me. It's a good cop, and I denied it forever, and I probably shouldn't have." That doesn't get anybody anywhere. Least of all, Lance Armstrong.
You're a lawyer, and I don't know if this is getting outside of your work there, but if you were counseling him as a lawyer, would you tell him basically there's certain areas you can't go right now because there's so many things ahead? So basically say to him, admit that you did it, but be very careful what you're saying.
If I were doing it as a lawyer, probably. I mean, clearly he waited to make these revelations, not that they're revelations because everybody knew it, but until after the statute of limitations on a possible perjury charge had expired. So they kept the ball up in the air long enough for that to happen. The rest is only money and reputation. Some of the prize money that he got and actually sued for
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, he may have to pay that back, but he's, by all accounts, is a wealthy man. He can certainly afford to pay back and not be ruined. His big problem right now is the federal whistleblowers action, which Floyd Landis has brought, and in which the U.S. Department of Justice is considering joining in. And that's a more serious one, because there are treble damages, not just what the USPS may have paid, and that could put a big hole into his financial well-being. Which may be one of the reasons why he said he reached out to Floyd Landis to try and make amends for having been such a rat.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of the word rat, I mean, there's talk now that he may testify and testify against the U.S. cycling and talk about the whole cover-up, if you will. So he would go from being a liar to a snitch, if you will. Have you heard stuff about that?
Yeah, there's all kinds of speculation out there. That's why, I know one has to fill the airwaves while waiting for all of these revelations to come out on Oprah. But that's probably one of the many possible outcomes here.
Would you expect, once he does the thing with Oprah, to start doing it more often, to just basically make himself a little bit more transparent to the public through the media, to basically get himself, and this is where I talked to you before about it from a lawyer point of view, but maybe from a PR point of view, once he's done the Oprah interview, just start doing more stuff like that to maybe work on cleansing his image?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, if were I counseling him on a PR basis, I would not have said, do this on Oprah. Go to a program where you're going to get somebody who's not going to let you get away with a monologue and require you to answer certain questions. I mean, it sounds like, from what I've heard, that Oprah arrived with 112 questions and didn't get a chance to answer them all.
Mm-hmm.
Ask them all, which would suggest that Armstrong sort of captured the mic and just kept talking along lines that suited him.
Yeah, that's where I said before, I'm sure if you went on 60 Minutes or some other network with hosts that are known to ask very probing questions, maybe he was worried about that as his first entry point into admitting his guilt. I guess that's something that'll come out later on. When he starts doing all of this, I know you just talked about it, but I mean, one of his objectives is to get back into competition, certainly as a triathlete. Is there a possibility, you think, through all what he does going forward, that he'll be allowed to get back into competitive athletics or having his lifetime ban cut?
Well, you're in a situation where USADA recommended a lifetime ban. The UCI accepted that recommendation in all respects, and WADA decided not to appeal it. So he's now got a life sentence. The only way that can be reduced is if he makes a significant contribution to the fight against doping in sport by information and whatever other actions that may be appropriate. If he doesn't do that, the sentence will not be reduced. If he does do that, then there's a lot more flexibility for either USADA or the UCI or even WADA to recommend that the sentence be reduced.
You and I went through the part, I believe it was in the 90s, when they had the Dublin Commission, and that was basically to look into the whole steroid use, of Canadian athletics. It was quite a big revelation at the time, as the various athletes and the trainers that were involved in all this laid out in detail the programs that they used to basically dope, to use steroids and that sort of thing. And it was very interesting because people finally really understood there was a detailed process in this. They took, they used charts, they used calendars, it was very scientific. Do you expect, again, if Lance Armstrong wants to become a competitive cyclist or a competitive athlete of any kind, he'll have to go through that kind of detailed analysis to really explain it all so people can understand, A, why he did it, but the way in which it could be done.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which, again, it's to me, it's very scientific. He's an incredible athlete, but he must have also had a plan, whether he was doing it alone, whether he developed these protocols for the way he was going to do it, or whether it was with a group of people. I think that's part of the story as well. Is Lance Armstrong this scientific genius that developed this protocol or this plan, or was he doing it in concert with other people?
Well, no, it's pretty clear from USADA that the major medical advice was coming from Michele Ferrari in Italy.
Mm-hmm. And basically how complicit he is in all this with Lance Armstrong. Yeah, again, if Lance Armstrong is doing it just like it came with Ben Johnson in that particular time, there were people that had the plan in place and he just followed it until he made a mistake or whatever, right? In the case of Lance Armstrong, will he basically be required to tell, here's the person, here's what he was doing, how the whole thing started, just lay it out in full detail?
Yes, for sure.
Is Lance Armstrong basically, and I'm going to talk to a sports marketing person later on, does he have any chance of reconnecting with all these companies that he used to be associated with?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, he is yesterday's news, and he's very tarnished goods at this point. And it's not like some, the recovery of Tiger Woods, because Tiger's shortcomings were not on the field of play, whereas Armstrong's were.
I've asked you before about athletes that use drugs and your fight against it. In a very simplistic way, are you comforted by the fact that finally he got it into his head that it was time to admit that he did it?
Well, I think psychologically it must have been a big blow to him to go from being king of the mountain to being, having your sponsors walk away from you, having your foundation walk away from you, universities who've given you honorary degrees withdrawing them. It must be a huge psychological weight on him. And I think the only way to get that off his shoulders was somebody must have said, look, the only way you can do this, and I think some of the other cyclists like Hamilton and are good examples. They say, listen, you can't believe the weight that will get off your shoulders when you finally stop lying about it.
Do you think something good will come out of this, because it's such a high-profile case that it will help lead in the crusade against drugs in sport, or this will just be one thing, it'll draw attention for a certain point in time, it'll blow over, and people that are doing it or think they can do it will still continue to do it?
Well, if it's properly handled and so forth, and the information is forthcoming, I think it could serve as a major deterrent and a major eye-opener for other sports and for the public to be a little more demanding of their athletes. I'd like to see some of it get down even into the professional leagues, where there's still a major problem. So there's potential for it to be very helpful. There's a potential for it if the public doesn't believe that he's contrite and he does nothing to help the fight against doping in sport. He's going to be on the outside for the rest of his life.
And in essence, then basically it's really up to him to decide how much forthcoming he wants to be, how transparent he wants to be. Use the word contrite. Any one of those ways to describe it, it's really up to him to decide what he wants to do with his future.
Yeah, he can certainly deal with that part of it, and I think whatever, depending on his conduct, there may be some chance that people will say, all right, well, everyone makes mistakes, not perhaps as spectacular as this, but he's trying to fight his way out of this hole now, and maybe at some point you forgive him. His problem is, unlike a lot of other athletes who've done this and sort of weathered the storm, is that an awful lot of people had a huge emotional investment in him. And to find all of that betrayed, faced with USADA and now eventually this confession, depending on what it is, they will be more deeply wounded than the ordinary fan, and it may take longer.
And again, I guess you're specifically referring to all the people who looked up to him because of his fight against cancer and how he was able to create awareness through Live Strong. I guess that's specifically what you're referring to right now?
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned before about other sports, professional sports. The National Football League indicated a few days ago about they're going to be testing for HGH. Was that something that you found refreshing in terms of a professional sports league, taking a bold step forward to sort of looking beyond just the ordinary drugs, whether it's cocaine, marijuana, just something which seems to be becoming more prevalent, HGH?
Well, it's certainly one of the drugs of choice, and it's part of the cocktail that people are taking. I mean, baseball announced with great fanfare a year and a half ago that they were going to test for HGH, and then they turned it over to a bunch of lawyers who solemnly pronounced themselves unpersuaded with the scientific reliability of the tests, and it's foundered there. Not a single reputable scientist in the world would dispute the effectiveness and the accuracy of these tests, but a whole bunch of lawyers did.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a risk that the same sort of thing could happen in football. And if you read the fine print, yes, they're going to test for it, but I think only during the season.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you're one of these people that believes that a lot of these athletes bulk up. Not a lot of these athletes, but some athletes bulk up on these drugs in the off season just to help them get themselves in shape as they're about to go into training camp and knowing that they're not going to be tested.
That's right. I mean, a good steroid program will last you 4 or 5 years. So it's a huge investment in the off season. It doesn't take the entire off season to go through a steroid program.
Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of high-profile cases of athletes that have used drugs and have been caught. It seems to be the movement towards outing out these athletes, if you will, has moved along far more than when I talked about the Dubbin case. Are you convinced right now that it's moving quick enough, or it's still a very slow process that's just going to continue to move inch by inch until someday somebody gets it in their head that you just can't use drugs in sports, and they'll be very vigilant in how they test for it?
Well, one hopes that day will come. I would say that there's probably a greater deterrent value out there now that the tests are catching up with what's going on. But as you can see from what happened with Armstrong, that if you can pay enough for the very best bent scientists and doctors, you can stay ahead of the testing program. The perpetrator always has the initial advantage because he knows what he's going to take, when he's going to take it, how it'll be administered, and all of that, and knows how to avoid tests. You can miss tests, you just can't refuse them.
Yeah, which begs the question, and I've probably asked you this before, whether the labs will be able to come up with the designer of drugs. They'll be on even keel, or even walk together with them, or it's basically the labs are always going to have to, or the drug testing is always going to be a step or two behind these guys that are developing these designer drugs, and new drugs will come along.
Yeah, I mean, it's not complete rocket science here, because they're sort of basic things that work. I mean, there's the muscle enhancement. There's the human growth hormone stuff, reducing body fat and increasing strength. There are blood enhancers and stuff like that. So there's really only certain types of drugs that will lead to performance enhancement. So you can, one of the things we do now is we deal with the pharmaceutical industry. And we cooperate with them in terms of, say, they've got something that may, that's the new EPO or a brand of EPO. You say, will you share the molecule with us so that we can develop a test for it? And in fact, probably the farmers themselves have to develop tests for this, because they're going to have to show what the impact of the drugs would be in order to get them through whatever the regulatory process is. So that kind of cooperation means that we can narrow the gap quite significantly and have tests before the drugs become publicly available.
Mm-hmm. There's a story, I guess you made a comment yesterday about you think that Olympic cycling should be dropped or could be dropped from the Olympics. Is this just because the sport has become so tarnished?
Well, this is one of these discussions that you have with folks in the media. They say, well, what if Lance Armstrong comes out and says that he had a lot of help from cycling authorities? And I said, well, if you end up where you've got all of the riders doing it, and all of the teams involved, and even the governing bodies are involved, you've got a real mess. And the I.O.C. should say, what is this doing to our brand? It's putting the Olympics in a very unfavorable light. What should we do to protect our own goodwill and the goodwill of the other sports that are in the games? And there's a whole range of possibilities, but one of which, perhaps towards the extreme edge, is to say, well, look, you're dragging us all down. Why don't you take a vacation from the Olympics for 4 years or 8 years, whatever it may be, and clean this up? And when you've got it cleaned up, come on back. And if you're clean, we'll be ready to welcome you back. Whether the I.O.C. would have the will to do something like that, I don't know. But it's certainly one of the range of possibilities that ought to be considered.
And again, is that predicated on what he says in the interview or what he's going to say going forward?
Well, all of the above.
Okay.
Above.
Last thing I want to ask you is, what should we as a society learn from anything like the tragic fall of Lance Armstrong? Again, not just as an athlete, but as a human who represented a cause that was really, part of our generation. The whole cancer awareness. I mean, it's not just a single fall of an athlete. It's a fall of a human being who became far bigger for more than just his work in athletics.
Yeah, it's the fall of an icon. I mean, he had built himself up into iconic status, and the media and the public were happy to go along with it because it was a great story, a great double story. Now, nobody's all bad. I think the work he's done for cancer awareness is something you have to recognize as good. And the only difficulty is the pedestal from which he was launching that good work turns out not to be granite but manure. Mm-hmm. And that affects the whole thing. I mean, the foundation doesn't want to be identified with him. They want him out.
Yeah, and that's, again, to me, a very sad part, that a guy who was helping to promote cancer awareness has now been basically tarnished, and you wonder if that's going to hurt what he was trying to do, because it wasn't just about him. It was about this cause that was far greater than him. So anyway, I want to thank you for your time again today, Dick. I always appreciate talking to you and getting your insights. Thank you. Thank you.